Amanda Rogers had always been the daughter her parents were proud of. At 28, she had already risen to the position of senior sales manager at one of Chicago's prestigious advertising agencies. Her corner office on the 32nd floor of a building in the city's business center overlooked Lake Michigan, and every morning, sipping her coffee, she could admire the endless expanse of water. Her colleagues respected her professionalism, clients trusted her judgment, and management saw her as a future partner in the company. Amanda possessed a rare combination of analytical mind and creative thinking. She could spend hours studying market trends, analyzing consumer behavior, and then in half an hour create an advertising campaign concept that brought clients millions in profits. Her latest project for a fast food restaurant chain increased their sales by 30% in a quarter. Success followed success, as if following a pre-written script for a perfect life. Amanda's personal life was also going well. 3 years ago, at a corporate party for one of her clients, she met Brian Collins. He was 8 years older than her and owned a small but thriving construction company, specializing in the restoration of historic buildings in Chicago. Brian did not possess the classic beauty of a movie star, but he had a reliability and solidity that appealed to Amanda after a series of unsuccessful romances with ambitious careerists. Their relationship developed steadily and naturally. Brian did not try to impress her with expensive restaurants or extravagant gestures. Instead, he invited her on walks through the historic districts of the city, told her about the architecture of the buildings he was restoring, and shared his plans for developing his business. Amanda appreciated his honesty, hard work, and the way he treated his employees, not as subordinates, but as partners in a common cause. Brian proposed a year ago during a trip to New York. No crowds of onlookers, musicians, or camera flashes, just the two of them on the roof of a hotel overlooking Manhattan at night, and simple, sincere words about how he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. Amanda said yes, without hesitation. For the first time in many years, she felt truly happy and secure. Wedding preparations began immediately after the engagement. Amanda approached the organization of the ceremony with the same meticulousness with which she ran advertising campaigns. Guest lists, menus, music, flowers, every detail was thought out and reviewed several times. She chose St. Patrick's Church in Lincoln Park, where her parents were married 30 years ago. The banquet hall at the Palmer House Hotel was booked 6 months before the celebration. Amanda spent 3 months looking for her wedding dress. She visited dozens of bridal salons and tried on hundreds of dresses before finding the one, a classic silk satin dress with lace inserts and a long train. Simple, elegant, flawless. Just like Amanda herself, her friends said. The only issue that remained unresolved for a long time was the wedding photography. Amanda studied the portfolios of dozens of photographers, but none of them inspired her complete confidence. Some were too creative and could turn the wedding into a fashion photo shoot, while others were too traditional and boring. Time passed, and no decision was made. The problem was unexpectedly solved by Amanda's mother, Margaret Rogers. Having worked for 20 years in an insurance company, she knew how to find practical solutions to the most difficult questions. One evening, when the family gathered for dinner at her parents' house, Margaret announced that a wedding photographer had been found. "I met David Harris at the mall today," she said, laying out the napkins. "He's a professional photographer now, with his own studio. When he heard about your wedding, he immediately offered to do the photography as a gift. Such a sweet boy, remember him?" Amanda certainly remembered David. They had dated for 4 years in college, but broke up right after graduation when it became clear that their life plans were radically different. David dreamed of a career as an artist and wanted to travel and seek inspiration in faraway countries. Amanda already knew then that she wanted stability, career growth, and a family. The breakup was peaceful, without drama or mutual recriminations. Two young people simply admitted honestly that they were going their separate ways. After college, they saw each other only a few times at alumni reunions. David did travel for a while, worked as a freelancer, and tried to break into the art world. According to his mother, he eventually settled down and took up commercial photography. Amanda was glad to hear that things had worked out for him. David's offer seemed like a reasonable solution. He knew the family, understood their traditions and preferences. Plus, as her ex-boyfriend, he was better than anyone else at capturing the moments that were truly important to Amanda. It was also a significant budget saver. Wedding photographers charged between $3,000 and $5,000 for their services. Brian took the idea calmly. He was one of those men who didn't get jealous about the past if the present was strong and reliable. Besides, he understood that everyone has ex-partners in their life, and normal people are capable of maintaining friendly relationships with them. Amanda contacted David through social media. He responded almost immediately, writing a warm message congratulating her on her upcoming wedding and expressing his willingness to help make the day unforgettable. His portfolio made a good impression on Amanda. Professional, high-quality work without excessive pretentiousness. It was exactly what she was looking for. They met at a cafe near Amanda's office to discuss the details. David looked good. Time had changed him for the better. His student's thinness had been replaced by athletic fitness. His long hair was neatly trimmed, and his clothes had a stylish restraint. He talked about his work, showed samples of wedding photo shoots, and patiently answered all of Amanda's questions. "I'm very happy to be able to do something important for you," he said at the end of the meeting. "You deserve the best, Amanda. And Brian seems like a decent guy. I sincerely wish you happiness." There was not a hint of resentment or regret in his words. David spoke like an old friend who was genuinely happy for someone else's happiness. Amanda felt relieved. She had feared that the meeting might be awkward, but everything went naturally and amicably. They agreed on all the technical details, discussed the shooting schedule, and talked about the style of the photos. David suggested taking a few test shots a week before the wedding so that Amanda could evaluate his work and make adjustments if necessary. Such a professional approach finally convinced her that she had made the right choice. After meeting with David, the final preparations for the wedding went smoothly. It was as if the universe had decided that Amanda Rogers deserved the perfect celebration. The weather promised to be sunny. All the vendors confirmed their readiness, and guests sent warm congratulations. Even her younger sister Rebecca, with whom Amanda had a complicated relationship due to her drug problems, promised to come sober and not cause any scenes. A week before the wedding, Amanda stood in the fitting room of the bridal salon, looking at her reflection in the mirror. The white silk dress fit her figure perfectly. The veil fell softly from her hair, styled in an elegant hairstyle. She looked exactly how she had dreamed of looking on the most important day of her life. Margaret stood nearby, wiping away tears of joy. Her mother had always worried about her eldest daughter more than she let on. Not because she doubted her abilities. On the contrary, it was precisely because she knew how much Amanda demanded of herself. Now, seeing her happy face, Margaret could finally breathe easy. "You look beautiful, dear," she whispered. "Brian is a very lucky man." Amanda smiled at her reflection. Yes, she was truly happy. 30 years of life had led her to this moment. A successful career, a loving husband, a strong family, a secure future. Everything had turned out exactly as she had planned since her youth. Maybe life really could be as simple and fair as in fairy tales. In a few days, she would become Mrs. Collins and begin a new chapter in her life. David would capture every moment of this wonderful day, and years later, she would be able to show these photos to her children and tell them about how she married their father. Amanda did not yet know that some stories do not end the way their main characters planned. David Harris closed the door to his studio and leaned against it, closing his eyes. The meeting with Amanda had gone better than he could have hoped. She looked exactly as he remembered her, flawless. The same expressive eyes, the same confident smile, the same subtle scent of perfume that he would recognize among thousands. 4 hours had passed since their meeting in the cafe, and his heart was still racing. David opened his eyes and looked around. A small room on the first floor of an old building in Wicker Park served as both his studio and his home. In the far corner was a narrow bed, next to it an improvised kitchen with a microwave and coffee maker. Most of the space was taken up by professional photography equipment, lighting fixtures, backdrops, tripods. But the most important thing was in a small room behind the studio, his dark room for developing film. David was one of the few contemporary photographers who still worked with analog technology. In his opinion, digital cameras killed the soul of an image, depriving it of real emotion. Only film could convey the true essence of the moment. David went into the dark room and turned on the red light. Dozens of photographs hung on the walls, his work from recent years. Landscapes, portraits, weddings, corporate events. Professional, technically flawless, but cold. Work for money, nothing more. His real passion began later, when he accidentally saw Amanda on the street 2 years ago. It was a summer morning, and he was returning home after a night shoot at one of the clubs. The red light at the traffic lights forced him to stop at the intersection, and that's when he saw her. Amanda was coming out of a coffee shop, talking on the phone. She was wearing a strict business suit, her hair pulled back into a neat bun. But for David, time seemed to stand still. The same gestures, the same gait, the same profile that he could draw with his eyes closed. David instinctively raised his camera and took a few shots, not fully understanding what he was doing. Amanda got into a taxi and drove away, while he remained standing on the sidewalk with the camera in his hands. That evening, he developed the film and saw what he had been looking for all these years since college. A real photograph. Alive, breathing, full of meaning. From that day on, his new life began. David found out where Amanda worked, studied her roots, memorized her habits. He didn't stalk her in the literal sense. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time with his camera at the ready. The coffee shop next to her office, the restaurant where she had lunch with clients, the park where she sometimes jogged in the mornings. Over 2 years, he accumulated more than 100 photos. Amanda at work, eating, talking with friends, shopping. David knew more about her life than any of her close friends. He saw her choosing fruit at the supermarket, frowning as she read documents, laughing at someone's joke in a cafe. The photos with Brian occupied a special place in the collection. David photographed their first dates, their engagement, their walks together. Each frame caused physical pain, but he couldn't stop. He needed to understand what was going on in Amanda's life, who this man was who had stolen her from him. Brian turned out to be exactly the kind of person David hated most. Successful, stable, predictable. He didn't have to fight for his place in the sun, search for himself, or go through creative crises. He simply took over his father's ready-made business and developed it, slowly and methodically, just as he had built his houses. No risks, no experiments, no real passion. That was the kind of man Amanda chose. Not an artist, not a dreamer, not a man with fire in his eyes. A practical builder who could provide her with a comfortable, predictable life. This realization broke David's heart completely. He opened a cabinet in the corner of the dark room and took out a leather-bound album, page after page. Amanda's entire life over the past 2 years captured on film. David slowly leafed through the photos, pausing at the particularly good shots. Here she is laughing, her head thrown back. Here she is looking pensively out of a cafe window. And here she is kissing Brian, but there is none of the passion that had been in their relationship in college. David always knew that sooner or later Amanda would get married. But he hoped that that moment was still far off, that he had time to change something, to somehow get her back. When Amanda's mother asked him to photograph the wedding, his first impulse was to refuse. How could he photograph the woman he loved marrying someone else? But then he realized it was a chance, a last chance to be close to her, to be part of the most important day of her life. Besides, a wedding photographer has unique access to everything that's going on. He can be anywhere, photograph anything, and no one will ask any questions. Everyone will just think he's a professional doing his job. David closed the album and put it back in the cabinet. Tomorrow, he had to prepare the equipment for the pre-wedding photo shoot. Amanda wanted to take a few test shots to check the quality of his work. He smiled. If only she knew how many photos of her he already had. In another part of town, Rebecca Rogers sat in the basement of a house on the south side of Chicago where drug addicts gathered. The syringe lay on the dirty mattress next to her, and the familiar warmth of heroin spread through her veins. In a few days, she was supposed to be a bridesmaid at her perfect sister's wedding, but right now, that seemed like a problem in a distant galaxy. Rebecca had always lived in Amanda's shadow. Her older sister was better at everything: school, work, looks, behavior. Her parents didn't even try to hide their preferences. When Amanda graduated with honors, got a good job, and began climbing the career ladder, Rebecca had just finished waitressing classes and was scraping by with odd jobs. She tried drugs for the first time at 19, out of despair and loneliness. Then there were attempts to quit, rehab centers, promises to her parents, relapses. 5 years of this hell. And now Rebecca no longer believed she would ever be able to live a normal life. Her mother, Margaret, still hoped for a miracle. She paid for expensive treatment, found the best doctors, and took her daughter to psychologists. But all the money went down a black hole, and there were no results. Rebecca knew that her family had gotten into serious debt because of her, but she couldn't stop. It was especially painful to see how easy everything came to Amanda. A good job, a loving fiancé, the respect of those around her. She had no idea what price her parents were paying for their younger daughter's treatment. Margaret didn't want to spoil Amanda's mood before her wedding by talking about family problems. Rebecca looked at her reflection in the broken mirror opposite. She was 26, but looked 40. Yellow skin, missing teeth, sunken cheeks. Next to the radiant Amanda in her white dress, she would look like a ghost. Maybe she shouldn't go to the wedding at all. Why ruin her sister's celebration? But Amanda had asked her to be her maid of honor. Despite all of Rebecca's problems, despite the money and things stolen from the house, despite the endless scandals, her older sister had not abandoned her. It was the last display of love in a family that Rebecca had almost destroyed with her illness. The drug was gradually wearing off, and reality was becoming clearer and more painful. Rebecca knew that tomorrow morning she would wake up in the same basement, in her own vomit, with hellish pain throughout her body. Then, she would look for money for a new dose, perhaps stealing something else from her parents or acquaintances, and so on and so forth until her body finally gave up. Meanwhile, Amanda would be trying on wedding dresses, choosing flowers, and making plans for her honeymoon. Two sisters, raised in the same family, following completely different paths. One toward happiness and success, the other toward inevitable death in the basement of a drug den. Margaret Rogers sat in her office at the insurance company, recalculating the family budget for the umpteenth time. The numbers stubbornly refused to add up. Rebecca's treatment at a private clinic cost $3,000 a month. Amanda's wedding was another $15,000. There was the mortgage, utility bills, and everyday living expenses. And her income was only decreasing. The insurance company was going through difficult times, and staff cuts were only a matter of time. Margaret had already taken out a loan against the house, used up all her savings, and sold her husband's car. But there still wasn't enough money. Rebecca relapsed again and again, and each relapse meant new expenses for treatment. And Amanda deserved a beautiful wedding. She had been the perfect daughter, the support and pride of the family for so many years. At least the photographer issue had been resolved. David Harris had always been a good boy, polite, and well-mannered. His offer to photograph the wedding for free was a real lifesaver. The $3,000 or $4,000 they managed to save would go toward paying off the most urgent debts. Margaret remembered David from his student days. He often came to their house when he was dating Amanda. He was a quiet, dreamy young man who could talk for hours about his plans to become a famous photographer. At the time, it seemed that he was not a good match for the practical and ambitious Amanda. Now she realized she had been right. They really were on different paths. It was good that David had not held a grudge over the breakup and was willing to help his ex-girlfriend on such an important day. It spoke to his decency and maturity. Perhaps the years had taught him to value friendship above romantic memories. Margaret closed her calculator and rubbed her temples. There were only a few days left before the wedding, and she had to do everything possible to make the celebration perfect. Amanda must not find out about the family's financial problems. This was her day, a day of celebration of love and hope for a happy future. The morning of September 15th was surprisingly warm for late autumn in Chicago. The sun streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Patrick's Church, bathing the marble columns in golden hues. David Harris parked his van near the side entrance and began unloading his equipment. 2 professional cameras, a set of lenses, tripods, additional flashes, the arsenal of a true wedding photographer. He was impeccable in his role. Black suit, white shirt, neatly trimmed hair, camera around his neck, extra on his shoulder, bag with equipment. David moved confidently and professionally, earning approving nods from the church staff. Another experienced photographer who knows his stuff. Inside the church, work was already in full swing. Florists were arranging compositions of white roses and hydrangeas. The sound engineer was setting up microphones, and the wedding planner was checking the final details. David introduced himself to the priest, showed his documents, and received permission to take pictures during the ceremony. Everything was formal, professional, and without unnecessary questions. He began taking the first shots of the empty church, a classic wedding photography technique. The interior, the decorative details, the play of light and shadow. It was routine work that he had done hundreds of times for other couples. But now, every click of the shutter sent a pang of pain through his chest. In a few hours, Amanda would be standing here in a white dress, pledging her fidelity to another man. David raised the camera to his eye and focused the lens on the altar. It was there, at those steps, that his story with Amanda would end. Officially, publicly, in front of witnesses. She would become Mrs. Collins, and he would remain just David Harris, the ex-boyfriend who once failed to offer her a decent alternative. But was Brian really the best choice? David had studied this man for 2 years, photographed him with Amanda, observed their relationship. A builder. An ordinary, mediocre builder who inherited the business from his father and goes with the flow. No ambitions, no dreams, no real passion. He even made the proposal boring, on the roof of a hotel, without imagination, without romance. Amanda deserved better. She deserved a man who would adore her, who would do anything for her happiness. Someone who understood her true value, not just looking for a suitable wife to start a family with. Brian married status, the idea of the right life, not the woman. David remembered what Amanda was like in college. Lively, sincere, full of enthusiasm. She could talk for hours about her plans, her dreams, how she would change the world. Now, all that remained of that girl was a beautiful shell, a successful businesswoman in an expensive suit who had learned to smile the right smiles and say the right words. Brian didn't see the difference. To him, Amanda was just a beautiful, intelligent woman of the right social status. He didn't know how she laughed at silly comedies, how she wrinkled her nose when she concentrated, how she bit her lip when she was unsure. All these little things that make a person unique remained behind the scenes of their relationship. David knew. He remembered her every habit, every gesture, every emotion. In 2 years of observation, he had studied Amanda better than she knew herself. In his photographs, she was real, not posing for the camera, but simply living, laughing, sad, pensive, happy. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted his thoughts. The bride's family was entering the church. Margaret Rogers in an elegant blue dress, men in dark suits, women in fancy dresses, and among them was Rebecca. David immediately recognized Amanda's younger sister, even though she had changed a lot. Painful thinness, a yellowish complexion, nervous movements, classic signs of drug addiction. The bridesmaid's dress hung on her like a coat hanger, and makeup couldn't hide the traces of a destructive lifestyle. Margaret approached David with a tense smile. "David, I'm so glad you're here. Amanda is running a little late, but she'll be here soon. Are you all set?" "Of course, Mrs. Rogers. The equipment is set up, and I've already taken a few shots of the interior. As soon as the bride arrives, we can start the pre-wedding photo shoot." He spoke calmly and professionally, but kept an eye on Rebecca out of the corner of his eye. The girl was standing in the corner, nervously fiddling with her purse and avoiding the gaze of her relatives. It was obvious that she had taken something before coming to the church. Her pupils were too dilated, her movements too jerky. This could be a problem. Drug addicts are unpredictable, especially in stressful situations. His sister's wedding was definitely a source of great stress for Rebecca, another reminder of her own failures. David thought that the conflict between the sisters might distract attention from himself. That was even a good thing. Half an hour later, the car with the bride arrived. David got his camera ready and went out to meet Amanda. She looked stunning, even in a simple dress, with her hair tied back in a ponytail. But when she appeared an hour later in her wedding dress, David felt his breath catch in his throat. The white silk dress perfectly accentuated her figure. The long train elegantly spread across the marble floor, and the veil created an aura of innocence around her. Amanda was the embodiment of perfection, an angel in human form. And in a few minutes, this angel would become another man's wife. David began the photo shoot, professionally directing the bride, suggesting poses and capturing the best angles. Amanda trusted his skill, smiling relaxed for the camera, sometimes laughing at his jokes. She saw nothing strange in her ex-boyfriend's behavior, only an experienced photographer doing his job. Meanwhile, he captured every second, every emotion, every glance. These weren't just wedding photos. They were the last chapter of their shared story. After today, he would no longer have the opportunity to be so close to her, to see her smile directed specifically at him. During the photo shoot, problems began with Rebecca. She kept going to the bathroom, returning with red eyes, nervously fixing her hair. When it was time for group photos with the bridesmaids, a quiet but tense argument broke out between the sisters. "Rebecca, can you at least behave normally on my wedding day?" Amanda hissed as David pretended to adjust the lighting. "I'm trying, Amanda. It's just so hard for me." "What exactly is so hard? Just standing there and smiling? You don't understand. You'll never understand." Rebecca turned away, and David saw tears in her eyes. Amanda sighed and put her hand on her sister's shoulder. "I'm sorry. I know this is hard for you, but it's important to me. Please." David captured the scene with his camera, but not for the wedding album. The conflict between the sisters was exactly what he needed. A diversion that would focus everyone's attention on family problems rather than on him. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the church was filled with guests. David took up position to the side of the altar, the classic spot for a wedding photographer, from where he could see the bride, the groom, and everyone present. It was the perfect angle for photographing the ceremony. Brian stood at the altar in a new black suit, nervously adjusting his tie. He looked excited but happy. A normal man on the most important day of his life. He had no idea that his world was about to fall apart. The wedding music began to play, and the guests stood up. Amanda appeared at the far end of the aisle, arm in arm with her father. She walked slowly toward the altar, and each step she took was like a stab in David's heart. It was like a funeral procession. The funeral of their love, their shared past, all their unfulfilled possibilities. David raised his camera and began to film. Professionally, technically flawlessly, capturing every emotion, every moment. The priest began the ceremony, reciting the traditional words about love, fidelity, and family happiness. Lies. It was all a lie. True love was what David felt. The willingness to do anything for the one you love, the ability to see their true essence, the desire to protect and defend them. Not this performance, staged for the sake of social conventions. Amanda stood next to Brian, facing him, and recited her vows. David looked at her through the viewfinder and realized that these were the last minutes when she still belonged only to herself. In a few minutes, she would become someone else's wife, and an insurmountable wall would finally stand between them. He couldn't let that happen. Not after everything that had happened between them. Not after 2 years of waiting and hoping for her return. Amanda was making a huge mistake, and someone had to stop her. The priest uttered the sacramental phrase, "If anyone has any reason why these two should not be married, let them speak now or forever hold their peace." David froze with the camera in his hands. It was now or never. Now or he would lose Amanda forever. The church was silent. No one, of course, was going to object to the happiness of the young couple. But David had objections. Many objections. The silence in St. Patrick's Church was almost palpable. 150 guests froze in anticipation as the priest continued the ceremony. Father MacDonald, a gray-haired man with kind eyes who had served in this church for 20 years, smiled at the newlyweds. He had performed hundreds of wedding ceremonies, but each one remained a special event for him, a moment when two souls were united before God. "Brian Collins," he began in a solemn voice, "do you take Amanda Rogers to be your wife, to love and cherish her in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part?" "I do," Brian replied firmly, looking Amanda in the eyes. There was not a shadow of doubt in his voice. Amanda smiled back at him. She was beautiful in her white dress, the veil softly framing her face, her eyes shining with happiness. It was her day, the moment she had dreamed of since childhood. David stood 10 feet from the altar, camera raised to his eye. He mechanically filmed the ceremony, but his mind was somewhere far away. Every word the priest spoke struck a nerve. Every smile from Amanda caused physical pain. He watched as the woman he loved gave herself to another man and felt something inside him break completely. "Amanda Rogers," Father MacDonald continued, "do you take Brian Collins to be your husband?" At that moment, something changed in the atmosphere of the church. Most of the guests didn't notice it, but David, accustomed to picking up on the smallest details, felt a strange tension. It was as if the air had thickened and time had slowed down. Amanda opened her mouth to say "I do" when a muffled sound came out, something between a sigh and a moan. She looked down and saw a red stain spreading across the white silk of her dress. At first it was small, the size of a coin, but then it grew larger and larger. Time stood still. Amanda stared at the blood on her dress with such surprise that she seemed unable to understand where it had come from. There was no pain yet, only bewilderment and confusion. She raised her hand to her chest and felt something warm and sticky. Brian was the first to realize what was happening, his face contorted with horror. "Amanda!" he cried, rushing toward her. But it was too late. Her legs buckled, and the bride began to fall. Red spots bloomed on her white dress, and her veil caught on the steps of the altar. The priest recoiled, dropping his prayer book. The church erupted in screams. Guests jumped up from their seats. Women screamed, men shouted, demanding that a doctor be called. Panic broke out in the aisles as people tried to get closer to the scene and run away from it at the same time. "An ambulance! Someone call an ambulance!" Brian yelled, kneeling down next to Amanda. She lay on the marble steps of the altar, her eyes wide open, her lips moving but making no sound. Blood continued to ooze from the wound in her chest, staining the white silk scarlet. Her breathing became increasingly shallow and irregular. David continued to shoot. His fingers automatically pressed the shutter button, the lens capturing every second of the tragedy. Later, these images would become key evidence in the investigation. But for now, he was simply doing his job as a photographer. His professional instincts proved stronger than the shock. Click, click, click. The dying bride on the steps of the altar. Click, click, click. Brian trying to stop the bleeding with his bare hands. Click, click, click. panic among the crowd of guests. Margaret Rogers pushed her way through the crowd to her daughter. Her face was pale as chalk, but she maintained an outward calm. Years of working in an insurance company had taught her how to act in crisis situations. "Amanda, sweetheart, hang in there," she whispered, taking her daughter's hand. "Everything will be fine. The doctors are on their way," but Amanda could no longer hear her. Her eyes glazed over, and she stopped breathing. At 28 years old, on the happiest day of her life, she died on the steps of the altar in her wedding dress. The sirens of ambulances and police cars sounded a few minutes later, but it was too late. Paramedics pronounced her dead, and police began cordoning off the crime scene. The church quickly turned from a temple of love into a scene of murder. Detective Sarah Miller was one of the first to arrive. An experienced investigator, she had seen many violent crimes in her 20-year career. But the murder of a bride during her wedding ceremony was something new even for her. She quickly assessed the situation and began giving orders to her subordinates. "Isolate all witnesses. Don't let anyone leave the church without questioning them. Call in the forensic team and the medical examiner, and find the murder weapon." The search for the knife began immediately. The police combed every corner of the church, checked the trash cans outside, and questioned the clergy. The killer had acted quickly and professionally. The wound had been inflicted precisely in the heart, and death had occurred within a minute. This indicated either medical knowledge or luck. Initial suspicions fell on the family. Statistics showed that in most cases, killers and victims know each other. And who could know a person better than their relatives? Detective Miller started with those closest to the victim. Brian was ruled out immediately. At the time of the murder, he was face-to-face with his fiancée, and all the guests saw his reaction. No weapon was found on him, and there were no traces of blood on his clothes, except for the blood that got on him when he tried to help Amanda. The parents were also cleared of suspicion. Margaret was sitting in the front row on the right, and Amanda's father was next to her. Both were in full view of dozens of witnesses at the time of the crime. But Rebecca was a different case. The bride's younger sister caught the detective's attention at first glance. Nervous, twitchy, with obvious signs of drug intoxication. During the ceremony, she stood to the left of the altar in a group of bridesmaids, just a few feet away from the victim. "Miss Rogers," Detective Miller addressed her when they were alone in one of the church rooms. "Tell me about your relationship with your sister." Rebecca nervously fiddled with the hem of her black dress. Her makeup was smudged from crying, her hands were shaking. "We sometimes argued. But I would never have hurt her. What did you argue about?" "Silly things. Money. My problems. Amanda thought I was wasting our parents' money on treatment." The detective wrote down every word. The motive for the murder was clear: family conflicts, money, jealousy of her successful sister, plus drug addiction, which could have triggered uncontrollable aggression. "Where were you when your sister was stabbed?" "I was standing where bridesmaids are supposed to stand. To the left of the altar. I didn't see anything until she fell." "Did you have a knife or other sharp objects with you?" "No. Why would I have a knife in a church?" But the detective had already noticed that Rebecca was avoiding direct eye contact, and her answers sounded uncertain. Classic behavior of a suspect who is hiding something. A search of Rebecca's purse yielded interesting results. No knife, but several bags of white powder and a used syringe. Drugs in a church on her sister's wedding day spoke volumes about the suspect's mental state. While the police questioned Rebecca, David stood aside and watched what was happening. His cameras were confiscated as evidence. They could have captured crucial moments of the crime. He himself testified as a witness and an old friend of the family. "Mr. Harris," Detective Miller addressed him, "did you know the deceased well?" "We met in college, but that was a long time ago. We had hardly been in touch in recent years. I agreed to photograph the wedding as a gift to the family." David spoke calmly and convincingly. There was genuine sadness in his voice, the reaction of someone who had lost an old friend. There were no signs of nervousness or attempts to hide anything. Did you notice anything suspicious during the ceremony? To be honest, I was focused on taking pictures. I was mostly looking through the viewfinder. It was only when Amanda fell that I realized something was wrong. How did the family members behave, especially the younger sister? David paused as if considering his answer. Rebecca seemed restless. She was nervous and often left the room. There was some tension between the sisters. These words added weight to the suspicions about Rebecca. A witness with no personal interest confirmed the police's observations. Meanwhile, forensic experts examined the crime scene. There were no signs of a struggle. The murder had been quick, with one precise blow. Blood spatters indicated the direction of the blow, from above, at an angle. The killer was about the same height as the victim, or slightly taller. Rebecca fit this description. She was only 2 inches shorter than Amanda, and the blow from above could have been delivered from exactly where she was standing. The weapon was never found. The killer either took it with them or hid it very well. But in the commotion after the crime, they didn't have much time to hide the evidence. Most likely, the knife was thrown away somewhere nearby. By evening, the picture of the crime began to clear up. Rebecca Rogers had a motive: family conflicts and money. She had the opportunity. She was standing next to the victim. Drug addiction explained her possible loss of control, plus her strange behavior on the day of the murder. There were no other serious suspects. Brian was completely ruled out. Her parents were unlikely suspects. The other guests had no motive for killing Amanda. David seemed like a neutral witness, an ex-boyfriend who had long since moved on. "We have grounds to arrest Rebecca Rogers," Detective Miller told his partner. "Motive, opportunity, suspicious behavior, plus drugs. We'll charge her tomorrow." When the police finally allowed the guests to leave, David was one of the last to leave the church. He approached Margaret Rogers, who was sitting on a bench, staring into space. "Mrs. Rogers, I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "If you need help with anything, arranging the funeral, anything." Margaret looked up at him, her eyes full of tears. "Thank you, David. You've always been a good boy. Amanda would be glad to have you here at a time like this." David gently put his arm around her shoulders, playing the sympathetic family friend. Inside, he felt a strange emptiness. Not relief, not satisfaction, just emptiness. It was as if a part of his soul had died with Amanda. He left the church in the gathering twilight and got into his van. The rearview mirror reflected police cars, yellow tape cordoning off the crime scene, and the silhouettes of detectives who continued to work. Tomorrow, all the Chicago newspapers will write about the tragedy at the wedding. Bride killed at the altar. Bloody wedding shocks the city. Sister suspected of murdering bride. The story would be sensational. And David would remain in the shadows, just a photographer who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. An old friend who wanted to give a gift and witnessed a tragedy. Detective Sarah Miller couldn't sleep for the 3rd night in a row. Something was bothering her about the Amanda Rogers murder case. Formally, everything added up. Rebecca had a motive, opportunity, and was acting strangely. But the experienced detective felt she was missing something important. On the 4th day after the tragedy, she decided to review all the case materials once again. In the conference room of the police station, there were photographs from the crime scene, witness statements, and the results of forensic examinations. In the corner were 2 of David Harris's cameras with flashcards that had not yet been fully examined. Miller turned on the computer and began reviewing the photos from the cameras. First, the pre-wedding photo shoot. Classic shots of the happy bride, group photos with her friends, family portraits. Then the ceremony, guests, the priest, solemn moments. Suddenly, the detective stopped. One of the frames caught her attention. It captured the second before the blow. Amanda was standing at the altar, reciting her vows, and in the lower right corner of the frame, a hand with a knife was visible. A hand in a black suit. Miller enlarged the image on the screen. The hand was clearly male, with a watch with a metal bracelet visible on the wrist. Rebecca was wearing a short-sleeved dress and had no watch. Moreover, the hand was not reaching out from the left, where the bridesmaids were standing, but from the right of the altar. The detective feverishly scrolled through the rest of the photos. Another frame showed the moment of the attack. The knife entered the bride's chest at an acute angle from below. And again, the hand in the black sleeve, now more clearly visible. There was a wedding ring on the ring finger. "Damn it," Miller whispered. "We arrested the wrong person." She called the forensic expert and asked for a detailed analysis of the photos. An hour later, it became clear that the killer was to the right of the altar, had access to the bride from the side, and struck with a professional downward motion, straight to the heart. At the time of the ceremony, only the priest, the groom, and the wedding photographer were standing to the right of the altar. The priest was automatically ruled out. 70-year-old Father McDonald was physically incapable of committing such a crime. The groom was also ruled out. He was facing the bride, and everyone saw his reaction. That left only David Harris. Miller summoned him for questioning under the pretext of clarifying details of his testimony. David arrived calm, ready to assist the investigation. He still looked like a grieving friend of the family, shaken by the tragedy. "Mr. Harris," the detective began, "I want to clarify once again your location during the ceremony. I was standing to the right of the altar, shooting from a side angle. The standard position for a wedding photographer. Were you taking pictures continuously?" "Pretty much. These are important moments in the ceremony. You can't miss them." Miller placed a printout of one of the photos in front of him, the one with the hand holding the knife. "Look closely at this photo. What do you see in the lower right corner?" David leaned over the photo. His face twitched for a second, but he quickly regained his composure. "It looks like some kind of object in the hand. Maybe a shooting artifact or a shadow." "It's not a shadow, Mr. Harris. It's a knife, and it's the hand of the man who killed Amanda Rogers." David leaned back in his chair. His professional facade began to crack. "I don't understand what you're talking about." "I photographed the ceremony as agreed, a hand in a black suit with a metal watch and a wedding ring. That's the same watch you're wearing right now, and the ring on the same finger." Miller placed several more photos in front of him. Each frame was like a guilty verdict. The camera had captured what the living witnesses had missed. "Would you like to explain how your hand with the knife ended up in the photos you took?" David remained silent, staring at the pictures. His carefully thought-out plan was falling apart because of his own photographs. The irony was cruel. The profession that was supposed to be the perfect cover had turned against him. While they were talking, another group of police officers obtained a search warrant for David's studio. What they found there exceeded all expectations. In a dark room behind the studio, they discovered a veritable altar of obsession. Hundreds of photos of Amanda on the walls, from recent secret shots to old photos from their college days, a calendar marked with the days he had followed her. A detailed plan of the church showing his position during the wedding. And the main find, a bloody knife hidden in a tank of developer. David had hoped that the chemicals would destroy the DNA traces, but he was wrong. Modern technology made it possible to extract genetic material even after such treatment. When the results of the search were reported to Detective Miller, David realized the game was over. His shoulders slumped, and the last spark of resistance disappeared from his eyes. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'm ready to tell the truth." The confession lasted 3 hours. David spoke monotonously, without emotion, as if he were telling someone else's story. About 2 years of stalking Amanda, about the collection of photographs, about his growing obsession and conviction that Brian was unworthy of her love. "I didn't plan to kill her," he repeated. "I just wanted to stop the wedding, to tell her she was wrong. But when the priest asked if there were any objections, I realized that words wouldn't help. She would never listen to me willingly. The technical side of the crime was thought out in detail. David brought the knife in a bag with his photography equipment. No one checks a professional's tools. During the ceremony, he held the camera in one hand and the knife in the other. The blow was struck at the moment when everyone's attention was focused on the exchange of vows. The camera was set to automatic, he explained. I set it to continuous shooting. That's why my crime was caught on camera. After the blow, he quickly hid the knife in his bag, switched to the mode of a shocked witness, and continued filming consciously. The chaos, the panic, the attempts to help the victim. The perfect cover. The only thing he didn't take into account was that the camera captured everything, including the moment of the murder. The technology that was supposed to help him hide the crime became the main evidence against him. A week later, Rebecca Rogers was released from prison. The girl was broken. The accusations of her sister's murder, the arrest, and the interrogations had destroyed her already fragile psyche. Her mother took her home and immediately admitted her to a private clinic for treatment of drug addiction. David Harris was arrested on charges of first-degree murder. The evidence was irrefutable. His own photographs, the bloody knife, the collection of Amanda's photos, and detailed plans for the crime. At the trial, he did not deny his guilt, but tried to explain his motives. He spoke of true love that no one understood. He said that Amanda had made a mistake by marrying Brian. He said that if she couldn't be with him, she shouldn't be with anyone else. The jury was not impressed by these explanations. Obsession and stalking do not justify murder. David was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brian Collins left Chicago a month after the trial. He sold his business, bought a house in a small town in Oregon, and never remarried. On the wall of his office hung a single photograph, Amanda in her wedding dress, taken a minute before the tragedy. The last picture of a happy bride. Margaret Rogers retired and devoted herself to caring for her younger daughter. Rebecca spent 2 years in a rehabilitation center, managed to overcome her drug addiction, and got a job as a counselor at a drug addiction treatment center. Her sister's tragedy gave her the strength to change her own life. St. Patrick's Church no longer held wedding ceremonies. Father McDonald resigned, saying he could not bless marriages after what he had seen. The building was sold and now houses an art gallery. The story of the bride murdered at the altar became one of the most sensational criminal cases in Chicago's history. Books were written about it, documentaries were made, and it was studied in academic courses on criminal psychology. But for those who knew and loved Amanda Rogers, it remained simply a tragedy, a story of how one person's obsession destroyed many lives. It shows that there is sometimes a very fine line between love and madness. And in his prison cell, David Harris still keeps Amanda's last photo under his mattress, the one where she smiles at the camera during a pre-wedding photo shoot. He looks at it every night before going to sleep and whispers, "Now you're mine forever." Some love stories end in tragedy. This one ended in murder.